It is really an honor and a privilege to be here with you today to speak on the topic of the dangerous conversation. And as Bryn mentioned, this is a large audience. It's actually the largest audience ever in Blue Point history. It's the largest webinar audience we've ever had. And just to give you a sense for the community that is on the webinar with you today, we have people from over a dozen countries. We have executives, we have line managers, we have consultants, coaches, teachers, mothers and fathers. We have HR managers and first-line foremen, a wonderful group. We actually have some shop supervisors who have taken their teams into lunchrooms to listen to the webinar today. We have a senior leadership team that is taking time out of their regular agenda and their conference room and are participating in the webinar. Have a college professor who is going to weave this into her curriculum for the day. So we're just delighted to have such a large and diverse group involved in this discussion, this conversation here today. And if you look at that large and diverse group, the one thing we appear to have in common is that we know intuitively how powerful a conversation can be. There's something about the nature of this thing called a conversation between two people that evokes such possibilities and such potential and is actually so powerful. The question for all of us is, are we really unleashing that power? At a layman's level, a question is this: does it matter what we say? Does what we say really have an impact on other people? If you look at this idea of the dangerous conversation, I like to say that one conversation can change a job, can change a career, and can change a life. I would encourage you just to think back, to cast your mind back over your career or over your life, and think about the 1, 2, or 3 conversations that have really mattered in your life. I've had the great honor of being the leadership coach of a number of very, very successful executives. And almost every one of them can identify that 1, 2, or 3 conversations that really served as a pivot point for their career. Everything changed as a result of that conversation. If you look at the idea of the conversation and look at it from our perspective as leaders, as coaches, what is our capacity to really engage in that kind of conversation? If other people were telling their story, how many conversations that we were involved in would be the conversation that changed jobs, careers, and lives? When you look at it in the course of a week, how many conversations do you have in the course of that week that really make an impact on other people? And if you are unable to answer that question to your own satisfaction, the question I would encourage you to have as a backdrop for our discussion here today is, what is holding you back? Because at the end of the day, if you cannot or will not engage in what I call the dangerous conversation, you simply cannot coach. Coaching is about the nature of the conversation. So as we explore that today, I would encourage you to make this a very personal conversation, a conversation you have with yourself about the power of your own voice. But before we dive into that conversation, I just want to do a quick review of a couple of the core sessions that we covered in the previous webinars. The first one is this idea of earning the right to coach, and whether or not we really have earned the right to be in somebody else's coaching story. 3 elements we looked at: authenticity, self-esteem, and noble intention. Authenticity. Are we living out our passions, our values in a transparent and authentic way so that people really see us as being coach-like? Self-esteem. Are we looking after ourselves in a way that we really can be of service to other people? Do we feel good enough about who we are that we don't have to advance our egos at the expense of the people we're coaching? And noble intention is the idea that coaching is really about the other person. It's really in many ways about us sacrificing our own interests temporarily, our own needs and wants temporarily in service of another person. Then we explored this idea of the relationship. We called it the perfect partnership. And not perfect because it is perfect in a literal sense, but it's a coming together of these 3 wonderful elements: appreciation, confrontation, and accountability. Appreciation, seeing the best in others. Confrontation, confronting them with that. And accountability, holding them accountable to be that. This whole relationship wrapped up into layman's terms is best described, I think, as this. When you walk into the room, do you see the best in others? Do you tell them about that best? And you hold them accountable to be that person. So when you look at the idea of both the relationship and the earning the right to be a coach, we really do get a sense that this is not something we are or naturally have. This idea of coaching and being a coach is something that we choose. So when you think of the idea of dangerous conversation, when you hear this word, what is the first thing we think about? My guess is that it evokes words and definitions like threatening, painful, menacing. If so, I would really encourage you to redefine the term for yourself in our conversation here today. I'd like you to think about a dangerous conversation as not being dangerous because somebody gets hurt, but rather it's dangerous because it is uncertain, it is unbridled, it is unknown, it is unrehearsed. When you think of that, it is unrehearsed. I believe that most of our conversations through the course of a day are rehearsed. We know what they're going to be. We've practiced them before. But a great coaching conversation is dangerous because it is completely unrehearsed. So if you look at it in the sense of the context of our businesses, most conversations that occur through the course of the day in a business has to do with standard business transactions. So if you step back and look at them, what do they look like? Quite frankly, most of them are intended to inform, inquire, receive information, even entertain. Probably most of them are intended simply to oil the transactions between people within the organization and don't convey great meaning and, quite frankly, don't change a lot of things. Most of a dangerous conversation, so when you think about the difference in a dangerous conversation, it starts with the nature of the topic itself. Dangerous conversations deal with topics that are much, much more important and, quite frankly, are much, much more personal. You can tell a dangerous conversation because, to some extent, it deals with items, topics such as values, passions, disappointments, dreams, failures, personal aspirations. The topic stream for a dangerous conversation is much more important and it is much more personal. Now, sadly, I wish I could give you the formula for having a dangerous conversation. I'm an engineering technologist in my first career, and I wish I could just set this out as a standard practice, as 5 simple steps to having a dangerous conversation. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. When you think about human interactions at their very core, they're messy, they're complex, they're spontaneous. If anybody comes along and tells you, okay, do these 5 steps and always do these 5 steps, I can tell you this is a bad formula for coaching. Coaching starts with the idea that all great conversations, all great coaching conversations are fresh. They're novel. Something is different about them. A great coach has the courage and commitment to go where no one has gone before. So the first element of a dangerous conversation, if you feel this is old territory, that this is an old rut, that these are old chestnuts that you're having a conversation around, I would encourage you to make a shift. Fresh tracks are the hallmark of a dangerous conversation. There's an old adage that says, talk is cheap. Nothing in organizations could be further from the truth. Talk is not cheap. Talk is incredibly expensive within our organizations. Think about everything you hear through the course of a day in your organization. I would suggest that most of it is just a distraction and drowns out what is most important to be said within the organization. The important truth that individuals need to hear so they can learn, grow, and change. Think about it. All of us are part of it. Organizations are rife with drivel, blather, and chatter, and we're all part of it. It's just the nature of humans. We like to keep the air full of words and language. It is the nature of human interactions. Then the question for us as coaches is, how can we be heard? How can we be heard even in the private conversation? How can our words really make a difference? The question for us as coaches is, does our voice matter? As we explore that today, and I'd like to put it in some kind of a context for us as coaches. And these are some concepts and ideas that I've raised in previous webinars, but are well worth a reminder. It's important that we remind ourselves as to what the nature of coaching is all about. Coaching is not a friendship. It's not a social connection. It is really a process, an intense interpersonal process designed to help somebody else make a major shift in their performance, their career, or their life. Think about that again. It's not a normal friendship or social relationship. It's an intense interpersonal relationship process that is designed to help somebody else make this major shift in their performance, their career, and their life. And the beauty of coaching is we all can benefit from it. Now the challenge is that we're all stuck to some degree. And this is not a criticism. It just simply is the truth. We all get stuck. And what keeps us stuck is we get stuck by our current habits, our assumptions, our beliefs, our practices, our priorities, even our relationships. These are the things that keep us stuck where we are, stuck in our career, stuck in our performance, stuck in our jobs, wherever that might be. And the number one tool of the coach is the dangerous conversation to help get us unstuck. Now, the other aspect of coaching that is particularly important for us to remember is all we have as coaches is now. Think about it. In the coaching conversation, all we have is the next moment ahead of us with this other person. And the challenge for us as coaches is to decide what is the most important thing we can do right now, in this moment, in this conversation for the person we're coaching. Now, I'll remind you that in Blue Point, we refer to the person being coached as the talent. So again, the question that confronts us is, what can you do right now? What can you do to best serve the talent in this next moment? Is it some feedback? Is that the gift you can give in this moment? Is it a question? Is it an affirmation, some form of affirmation? Is it a constructive confrontation? Some insight? Is that the best thing you can do for the person in that moment? Maybe part of the conversation is nothing at all. As Susan Scott said in her wonderful book, Fierce Conversations, let silence do the heavy lifting. So maybe that's the gift we give in that moment. So why is a good coaching conversation dangerous? What about it? What are the characteristics, the qualities of a good coaching conversation, and what makes it dangerous? First of all, it is the nature of what it confronts. A good coaching conversation confronts things that are often uncomfortable, like failure and disappointment, unmet aspirations, relationships, things that often are difficult to deal with in the moment. It also evokes emotion. It is very rare for you to be involved in a very potent coaching conversation where there is no emotion involved. It might be excitement, it might be sadness, it might be gladness, it might be joy, but a good coaching conversation always evokes some kind of emotion. It is uncertain. I spoke earlier about the conversation being unrehearsed. The uncertainty of a coaching conversation can be very nerve-wracking because we constantly are going places where we have no footing. We've never been there before. And then lastly, it's not about me. The coaching conversation is not a friendship conversation. It's not a conversation of equals. It's really about the other person. And when the conversation is truly about the other person, in many ways driven by the other person, I lose control. So when I'm in a conversation in which I have lost control, this is a dangerous conversation. So what do we do in these dangerous conversations? The first gift to the person being coached is what we call the gift of fresh eyes. It's helping that person see things differently. no matter how smart the person is, no matter how self-aware the person is, no matter how experienced the person is. The one thing they can see, the only thing they can see is through their own eyes. And it is through the coaching conversation, the dangerous conversation, we give people the gift of multiple views. We help them see their world through fresh eyes. Secondly, we help them create new pathways. And these are new pathways simply through the nature of the conversation. We encourage them to identify and let go of things that no longer serve them well, to let go of the pathways that are no longer serving them well, and help them identify what pathways now might serve them well in their role as a leader, as a manager, as a professional, as a mother, as a father. We also challenge their assumptions. And many times these are assumptions about things that will get in their way, that are stopping them, that are blocking them. We help them challenge assumptions in which they get in their own way, thus help them create new pathways going forward. Many times in the course of a dangerous conversation, we challenge notions about what people are really good at. And in doing so, we help them identify unused talent. John Gardner, the wonderful writer, said one time, most human talents go undiscovered. Most human talents go undiscovered. So that really is the mantra of the coach, is that if we're going to help people create new pathways going forward, one of the great ways of doing that is helping them identify talents that they've been holding in exile, things they've been keeping off to the side, they haven't brought in and incorporated into their work, into their job, into their life. And lastly, many times, what the coach is able to do is to shine a light on those pathways that the person being coached knows are out there. They've just been avoiding. They've been shunning. They are pathways that might be littered with danger, but are extraordinarily rewarding. It might be pathways that involve a risk, a sacrifice, an investment, something they need to learn, but is a pathway that would produce great rewards for themselves personally. So it is through the nature of a dangerous conversation that we help people create these pathways. Now, I'm going to do an experiment on this webinar. I'm going to engage in a very cursory, dangerous conversation with you. There's a question that I often use with my clients when we're starting off a coaching conversation, a coaching relationship, and that's this. Before we dive into your strategic plan and your leadership agenda, step back for a minute and ask yourself this. What are your true passions? What do you feel most strongly about in life and in work and in your career? Many times it is through this often confrontational, sometimes novel question that starts the dangerous conversation. So I'm going to ask every person on this call right now to answer this question for yourself. At this point in your career, in your job, in your life, what are your 3 greatest passions? I'm not saying what are the ones that play out the most in your work, but what are the things that are most important to you at this point in your life or your career? Now, I put up on the screen a list of passions. This may or may not be a comprehensive list. What I'm going to ask you to do is this. Just wherever you are right now, just write down 3 of these passions. Scribble it on a scrap of paper somewhere, and write down 3 passions that are really important to you. 3 words that jump off the screen. 3 things that just are really burning in your soul these days. So as you do that, I would like you to be thinking about this. I'd like you to take these 3 words, and then I'd like you to circle one of them. I'd like you to circle the one that shows up most frequently in your job. Which one drives you these days? Which one fuels you? Which one are you able to really live out in your job these days? Just circle that one. Good. Now what I'm going to ask you to do is now put a rectangle around the one that gets the least amount of your attention, the one that may not show up in your work at all, the one that's really important to you, but there's probably a dissonance between it and your work these days. So now we've already set the basis for a dangerous conversation. If I was coaching you in the moment, I would ask you about how you could take that one that you've circled and really Have it play out more in your work and your life. How can you double, triple the impact of that passion in what you do? Then I would also ask you this, the one that you drew the rectangle around, how do you feel about that? Where is the disconnect between it and your work? How can you really bring your full self into your work without that aspect, that thing you feel so passionately about, showing up in your work? This would be the basis for a dangerous conversation. So when we start talking about things like passions, passions met, passions developed, passions unexplored, we're having a dangerous conversation. Now, it's really interesting what we think about conversations and coach-like conversations most often in organizations. The one thing, big message I'd like to leave you with today, is great coaches are not scratching posts or sounding boards. What this means is we are not scratching posts for old organizational complaints, nor are we sounding boards for how badly your boss is treating you. We are actually not even confidants. And I know for many coaches on the call today, that word is often used in your descriptions of what coaching is. But I would really encourage you to look at coaching as something different. We are not scratching posts, sounding boards, nor confidants. We are catalysts for personal change. I would also encourage you, especially if you have an organizational role, don't get drawn into this. Don't get drawn into being that person that anybody can stop by your office. They can dump on you all the things that are happening to them. They can share with you their deepest and darkest secrets. They can talk about how badly they are treated in the organization. Leave it with you, get up, leave, feeling somewhat better because they've unloaded, but that being a very temporary solution. That listening is a very important aspect of coaching. But listening as a scratching post or a sounding board is not the role of the coach. That's not what we do as coaches. What we do is we help people discover for themselves the action they can take through this powerful dialogue we call a dangerous coach. So what do? We provoke. We provoke people to learn for themselves. We affirm the talents and gifts that people have. We challenge people to take personal responsibility. We challenge them to see the results of their own behavior. We help them ignite their own passions. In the brief exercise that I did just previously, that's what I was trying to do. In my small way, I was trying to remind you of your passions, what's really important to you. And I was trying to, even through this very limited media of the webinar, ignite that passion, get you thinking again, okay, what is important to me? How is that showing up in my work? We test assumptions. Most limitations are self-imposed. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Most things that hold me back are my assumptions that I make about my own potential, about my responsibilities, about how other people will react, other people will behave, what other people will let me do. So much of coaching is about testing these assumptions. And it really enriches our all-round thinking about our own potential. Coaching is a very personal encounter. Whether or not you're doing on-the-job coaching, whether or not you are doing what we would consider to be leadership coaching at Blue Point, whether or not you are doing career coaching, whether or not you're coaching a son or a daughter, a father or mother, brother or sister, whether or not you're coaching a colleague, coaching your boss. Coaching at its core is a personal encounter. If you look at the nature of coaching, as I had mentioned before, even though it's a personal encounter, it's not a friendship. What distinguishes coaching from a friendship is that you still may really like the other person. The other person, in fact, may be your friend. But in the moment of coaching, it's all about the other person. It's not about you, and it's not about your relational needs getting met. Now, if you're really good at it, you can coach your friend. You can coach a family member. But in that moment, it's not about your relationship. It's really about the other person. And if you look at how these personal encounters fail, the number one reason for either the failure of coaching or lukewarm coaching is the reluctance of us. It's not the person being coached. It's not their fault. Most coaching fails because of us. It is our reluctance to broach difficult topics, either out of our own fears that we don't want to go there, or because of our mistaken belief that the other person is so fragile that they cannot take it. They cannot deal with the topic. They cannot be confronted. They cannot be encouraged. They cannot explore that aspect of their life or their performance. Think about this. The person you are coaching will get as much out of the coaching conversation as you are prepared to tolerate, as you as the coach. The person you are coaching will get as much out of the coaching conversation as you, the coach, are prepared to tolerate. I would suggest also in this personal encounter, the second most problematic aspect, the second thing that holds back and impairs the effectiveness of the coaching is our desire, the desire in the coaches to solve their problem, to fix them in some way, to be very helpful in some way, to pull them out of their mess, out of their puddle, to help them seize their opportunity. If you step back from the coaching encounter, the coaching conversation, and you ask yourself this one question: what can I say in this next moment that will be most helpful to the other person? And I would encourage you to trust two things. Trust your intention and trust your intuition. Trust your intention and trust your intuition. In the course of my work, I'm often asked by people, okay, Greg, I have this circumstance, I have this conversation, what do I say to the person? And I used to try to come up with some kind of an answer, some kind of nifty question or nifty intervention for the person. And what I have learned is my best answer is I don't know. I do not know what is the best thing you can say in that moment. Only you know. Trust two things. Trust your intention and trust your intuition. What you will say in that next moment will be the very best thing for that person. At the end of every coaching session that I have, I try to help my clients with the gift of the verbal commitment. What I ask of them is to make a verbal commitment to action, regardless of how small, and I ask them to make it out loud verbally. Now, there's incredible power in commitment, but there's incredible power in a verbal commitment. Actually, I ask them to make a promise. When they make this promise, this commitment to action out loud, it's not about me hearing it. It's not about me hearing it. So I'm going to repeat it back to them the next time we speak. It's about them hearing what their own commitment is. And there's something special that happens for us as humans when we say out loud in a conversation what we're promising to do. Because then we cannot unring that bell. Those words ring in our ears for the next week, the next month, the next year. Think about it for yourself. How many times have you made a personal commitment to people, and that has really fueled some kind of change, some kind of action, some kind of real concerted effort on your part to get something done? The gift we give in the dangerous conversation is to always challenge and confront the person we're coaching to take action and to make that promise out loud. Constructive confrontation, maybe the greatest gift of all. Not all coaching has to be incredibly painful. Many times coaching can be a very exhilarating, joyful experience. But there's often a time in the coaching conversation when the coach needs to and is best advised to constructively confront the person being coached. I believe that most people really, really want to hear the truth, but they rarely hear it. And one of the reasons they rarely hear it is that us as coaches are reluctant to share it with them. The other reason is that maybe we haven't earned the right to share that with them as well. I have asked this question of literally thousands of leaders. And the question is this, and I do it typically when I'm speaking to large groups. I ask the participants in the audience to ask themselves this question. If somebody in your organization knew something about you that could be very helpful to you, but it was a behavior or a practice or something you were doing that was really turning people off. And in fact, it was probably heading your career into the ditch. And you really trusted this person, and you really believed that this person had your best interest at heart. Would you want this person to come to you privately and share that information with you? Time after time, 99% of the people in the audience will put their hands up. We want to hear that information, but we want to hear it from somebody who has our best interests at heart, and we want to hear it privately, and we want to hear it from somebody we trust. Is this not the definition of the coaching conversation and the coaching relationship? So I would really encourage you in that coaching conversation to care enough about the person that you are coaching to tell them the things that nobody else will tell them. Tell them the things that you know will be most helpful to them. Tell them the truth. Tell them about how their behavior is impacting other people. Tell them how you believe they are selling out on themselves. Tell them what talents you think they've got that they're simply not using and they could use to serve others better. They could use to unleash their own creative self in some way. Share with them your opinion of the personal cost that they are paying for being a small version of themselves when you believe they could become a much bigger version of themselves. Susan Scott, who those of you who have been on our webinar series, you've heard me quote Ms. Scott many times from her book, Fierce Conversations, which is a brilliant piece of work. This is, by far, my favorite quote from the book. There is something within us that responds deeply to people who level with us, who do not pamper us or offer compromises, but instead describe reality so simply and compellingly that the truth seems inevitable, and we cannot help but recognize it. And this is my favorite part. The one person who can most accurately describe reality without laying blame will emerge the leader. The one person who can most accurately describe reality without laying blame will emerge the leader. I would like to leave some suggestions with you. 3 habits that I will promise you, if you incorporate these 3 habits into your day-to-day leadership, into your day-to-day activities, these 3 habits will change everything and will make making dangerous conversations a real habit for you. Will make it just an ongoing routine part of who you are and what you do in your leadership and in your professional role. The first one is, and I would encourage you to do this every day, simply getting clear about your intentions. Get clear about your intentions. If you find yourself having dangerous conversations and it's meant simply to get something off your chest, this is not a coach-like dangerous conversations. This is you simply, under the guise of coaching, getting it off your chest and having your needs met. I can tell you this, that if your intentions are solely about helping the other person, we are very transparent. They will know this, and they will allow you a very wide berth in the conversation, a very wide berth to raise all kinds of issues, to give them all kinds of feedback, if they believe that your intentions are really about advancing their interests. The other is this, and this one here is probably the most practical thing that I'll share with you today. It's called 1 a day. Commit to having 1 dangerous conversation a day. I have had clients who have committed to this and have done this and have said, Greg, this has made such a difference in everything that I do, and it has allowed me to show up as a leader much more authentically, much more powerfully, and quite frankly, I've been able to serve the people around me so much more because I've made a habit of every day finding 1 opportunity to engage in a dangerous conversation. Now, sometimes the first reaction people will have, well, Greg, you know, they don't always come my way. I don't always have the opportunity to have a dangerous conversation. To that, I say, bah humbug. I will tell you, it's a pretty unusual person that doesn't have an opportunity every day to have at least 1 conversation that is truly dangerous, that is really about the other person, that helps the other person gain fresh understanding of their situation, seize their opportunity, step up to a bigger game in some way. One opportunity to have a conversation that's a little uncomfortable, but you're going to do it anyway because you care enough about the other person. And lastly, is you really need to let people go. It's difficult to have, probably impossible, to get into the habit of having dangerous conversations when you take accountability for other people, when you really are trying to fix other people, when you're trying to take accountability for their reaction to the conversation, when you're taking accountability for their performance, when you're feeling that you're too powerful for them and that you might hurt them in some way. This does not mean don't care about another person, but care enough about them to allow them to be fully responsible for their own life, their own career, their own work, their own problems, their own opportunities. And see yourself, whether or not you're their boss or you're their subordinate, you're their brother or you're their sister, you're their pastor or you're their teacher. Simply see yourself as a person that cares enough about them to engage in a performance-changing or career-changing or a life-changing conversation, but you'll let it go. Whatever they do with that conversation is up to them. Describing what a dangerous conversation actually is extraordinarily difficult. I hope I've given you a sense for what it is here today. The one thing I do know is I know when I've had a dangerous conversation. You probably do as well. We call it walk away empty. You know, you've had that conversation, and at the end of the conversation, you know that you haven't left anything on the table. You've done everything you could in that conversation to serve the other person. It's not just that you've put everything off, you've gotten everything off your chest. That's not what I'm referring to at all. But you've had the courage to go down those pathways with another person to help them explore every avenue you could think of. You've challenged them in every way that you could. You've given them every piece of positive feedback, every affirmation, every appreciation you could, and you walk away empty. Now, this is the gift that you get from coaching. You may never get credit for anything the other person does, but in your heart of heart, you know one thing. You've taken nothing away from that conversation that you didn't need to leave behind. I want to thank you for your participation and attendance on the webinar today. It's been great to have you all on the call. I do want to leave you with one idea that I raised earlier, and I would just encourage you to sit with this question as you think about yourself as a coach. The person you are coaching will get as much out of the coaching conversation as you personally are prepared to tolerate. So the more ambiguity, the more emotions, the more lack of control that you are prepared to tolerate, the more you are able to serve somebody else in the coaching conversation. You'll see on the screen in front of you now, you'll see my telephone number and my email address. I love to hear from you about your own journey as a coach. As a coach, there are no great coaches. Great coaches, the people we see as great coaches, are simply wonderful men and women who really care about us and who each morning choose to be coach-like. So my encouragement to you is to make those choices and to look at the opportunity you have every day to engage in dangerous conversations. Thank you.